Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. And welcome then to the closing session now of what I'm sure you all agree has been a most thought-provoking and a very exciting and inspiring forum today. We'll start this next session then. It is a conversation on the fundamental issue of responsible corporate practices, held between Ms. Christiane Amanpour, Chief International Correspondent, of course, for CNN and host of Amanpour, and I'm delighted to say to Mr. Paul Polman, CEO of Unilever. Please welcome them to the stage.
Welcome. It's great for me to be here. Thank you so much to the organizers for inviting me to take part in this conversation in this final session. It's a massively, massively important topic, and who better to talk to about this, and at this time, than Paul Polman, CEO of Unilever. First and foremost, let's just start with the climate, because that's happening right now. As we speak, they may be about to sign a draft agreement or the final agreement of the COP21. From your perspective, and you've been there, give us the historic perspective of what may or may not be discussed there, or rather what conclusion may be reached.
So I think the reason people are there, you're well aware of, and we'll skip that one, but this is the fact that it's COP21 points out that people have been at this for a long time and why it's a challenge really to put something together. The positive thing is, obviously, if you look at the last year or two, there has been an enormous mobilization from the private sector, from civil society around climate change. I think people are starting to understand, and frankly, we should have never called it climate change, but that it is a development agenda, and that the world simply would not function if we don't start to tackle these issues. The Paris negotiations, if you want to, I was only there as of last week, Thursday actually. And in fact, I was coming from Indonesia because we were still working on the issues of deforestation, which is closely related to, obviously, the climate change. And what we're really seeing here is, it was mentioned before today, that the Sustainable Development Goals have been signed this year in New York in September. And they really have an audacious goal to irreversibly eradicate poverty in a more sustainable and equitable way. And that can only be done, really, if you do climate mitigation. I think people are starting to understand that what we're talking here about is the two sides of the same coin, and it is really a human development issue. So the issues that were at stake in Paris this last few weeks, first of all, a very revolutionary process for the first time, where countries came in with their own proposals, which were called INDCs, Intended Nationally Determined Commitments. If you want UN acronyms here, you have one.
Too many acronyms, that's one problem.
But these INDCs were proposals from the countries. So interestingly, out of the 196 countries, about 175 submitted their INDCs. And what is revolutionary about this is what you are planning to do. So some countries were ambitious, some countries were less ambitious. But in total, all these commitments added up more or less to a 30% reduction, moving you from the 4 degrees to about 2.7 degrees. Target being 2, I'll come back to that later. And equally importantly, the commitments that came in added up to about 4 times what was done in the Kyoto Protocol. So here you have 175 countries committing, and then 4 times the Kyoto Protocol. 4 issues that are very important that seem to be that are definitely in the final text. So if that gets approved, and I'm waiting for this email to come, but the 4 issues were obviously the first one that we want is an end goal. Business needs to know what the target is. We would say 2 degrees by 2050, which is a 1.5 degrees at the end of the day, at the end of the century. There needs to be a commitment that we work towards a target. If that is clear in the text, then business will unlock quite a lot of investments. The second issue is one, not surprising, is one of financing. It's always an issue: who's caused the problem, who deals with the problem, how do you finance mitigation, resilience building, and that is where's the money coming from, how do we count it, etc. This is the famous 100 billion climate fund. The third issue is that we need to come back on a 5-year cycle of negotiations without backsliding, they call it. So it's a ratcheting mechanism without backsliding. That means that everybody that submits the targets now needs to move forward from there, and that is a positive thing. And the final thing is, as you can expect, is one of accountability and measurements of the progress. So all of that is in the text. That is the encouraging thing. Even the 1.5 degrees is in the text. A lot of the Island states have asked for that. So if, frankly, I was looking at it on my machine today, if this text in its current form gets approved, we can actually be very pleased as a first step towards solving a bigger issue.
All right, and we'll come back to some of the, what does it take to reduce emissions through the cycle of your business and everybody's daily life. But first I want to ask about you. I come from a boss, Ted Turner, who perhaps pioneered corporate social responsibility and was on the cutting edge of just about every good initiative of the last half century or more, and still is. I also come from a journalism background where one of the greatest owners and entrepreneurs was Katharine Graham of the Washington Post, who once said, good journalism is good business. You are quite far ahead in the corporate sphere of saying good business practice and sustainability is also good for the bottom line. Before I get to the bottom line, you also once studied to be a priest, is that correct? How has it influenced you as a corporate leader?
Well, it's difficult to say because you go through life and a lot of these things influence you, and this probably undoubtedly as well, but I discovered that there were more interesting things in life, so I chickened out of that one. And then I wanted to be a doctor and it didn't work either. But I think at the end of the day, it is about helping others, and I think that awareness is there. Basically, the foundation of all we do is for the common good, as was pointed out by the senator today. And I think that comes from a belief, it doesn't have to be Christian, but you have to have a little bit of a broader belief in order to be able to make that come alive.
But let's drill down on that, because I also wanted to be a doctor, it didn't work out, but I hope by my journalism I'm helping people, and you are, by your business practices, helping. There are a lot of people, perhaps a lot of people in this room, certainly a lot of people in the business world, who, it's the money stupid, right? It's the economy stupid is the way it goes, who say, yeah, it's all very well being responsible and sustainable and all the rest of it, but what about the bottom line? What about our shareholders? Sure. They want to see, they want to see that they're getting a good return. And where is the share price right now, and where is your commitment to carrying on with this responsible, sustainable management?
Well, if you talk about Unilever share price, it's actually not that interesting to me. I'm actually not following it that closely, but it certainly has been more than doubled over the time that I've been CEO, and I don't get complaints on that, which is really, I'm now in my 8th year. So what we basically are saying is not that we don't want to satisfy the shareholder as one stakeholder, but we certainly don't run our business for the shareholders. I've been very clear when I came to the company. One of the first things, I happened to be the first CEO coming in from the outside, but one of the first things I did was stop quarterly reporting, stop giving guidance, and all the other things, because it was very clear to me that in order to solve these longer-term problems, that we also had to have a business model that would work longer term. Now, I think
the short-termism stood in the way of what? Of best practices, of responsibility? I mean, the 90-day cycle
the short-termism gets in the way. We call it shareholder primacy, and it has taken over a little bit the way that many people are being forced to run their companies, and that's obviously unfortunate. I've always believed that the reason companies are there is to solve issues in society and make a positive contribution.
But that's very rare. If I might just interrupt you and show you all this chart, which is obviously in the Economist not so long ago. Unilever, as you can see, is way ahead on the issue of sustainability. Many of the other top companies are far behind. So you say it as if it was obvious, but it's not obvious. No. You are actually kind of breaking the mold, and it's tough.
Yeah, we're not celebrating these charts because, in fact, if we end up doing all the things that we want to do and nobody else does it, it's still difficult to face my children and theirs. So this is not something. My father used to say, if you want a great leader, if you want a lot of people under you, become a tender of a graveyard, but nobody is smiling. So
full of quips.
No, but this is that as well. We have an issue, obviously, that we need to galvanize change and that we need to get more companies involved. But I think increasingly people are starting to understand. You were talking about the climate change. We had 6.5 million companies in May when we had the climate summit in Paris. 6.5 million companies calling for a price on carbon. We have the financial market now getting actively involved, which usually is a sign, even if there's no moral thing there, perhaps, or benevolence or whatever it is, whatever drives these people. At the end, when financial markets start getting interested, you can create tipping points.
Do you think, maybe not you, but the corporate world in general failed to provide shareholders, citizens, people with a proper financial forecast, or rather an economic forecast of actually what searching for clean alternative energy could be, of the actual GDP figures, of the fact that, you know, it could actually be good for the economy? If I had just interviewed Bill Gates, I've interviewed a lot of people around this, and now I'm interviewing you. And we exist in a world where the skeptics and the deniers, by and large, give us the economic argument, that it's not good for our companies, it's not good for us. But is it? And why haven't you been able to persuade the people at large of that?
I think we are in many areas at a tipping point. I'm less pessimistic than your question might suggest. What you should realize is that, first of all, when we created, or Kofi Annan at that time, the Millennial Development Goals, which was in the year 2000, which had a simple objective for the next 15 years to halve the number of people living in poverty, at that time defined as $1.25 a day. We actually achieved that. And never ever have we lifted so many people out of poverty. Never ever have we given so many people access to education, to hygiene, to clean drinking water. Even measures that we haven't quite achieved, like maternal health, have improved tremendously. What unfortunately has happened, and I think the 2007-2008 crisis made us realize that the system that we had created to do that, when it was serving us well and the stock market was going up every year, nobody asked themselves questions. Not business, but not civil society either. But when we discovered that it was done at a tremendous cost of government debt, of private debt, overconsumption, leaving too many people behind, we started to realize that we needed to fine-tune our system. Our initial response, which was a financial crisis, a government crisis, an economic crisis, was to pump more money in without going to the root causes of this. Now with the SDGs, which is our first moment of the Sustainable Development Goals, we can really look at a little bit of redeveloping our economic system. Just like Roosevelt did with the New Deal, and you got Social Security, you got Medicare and all the other things, and this was in the United States. We are now in desperate need to evolve. And what I am saying is very simple, which is not really rocket science, that there's no business case in enduring poverty. There really isn't. And if you believe that we are there to serve society, then you have to develop your business models if you want to be accepted long term by ensuring that you have a positive footprint. Now, increasingly, we are facing the tipping point where the cost of not acting is becoming higher than the cost of acting. And that wasn't the case 5 or 10 years ago. Now, unfortunately, what you now see is a very short tenure of CEOs, 4.5 years, still a pressure of the market, people that unfortunately are not well prepared for this more complex environment that we live in, a political system that doesn't quite function, things that were developed to deal with the global issues date still from Bretton Woods, the World Bank, the IMF, the OECD, and they're not really representative of what the current global economy really is. So you have a stalemate at the political side, and business then needs to step up and de-risk and get involved. And unfortunately, we don't have enough leaders yet that have been trained to do that. And that's really the challenge that we're going through. What I focus on, which is obviously try to earn a seat at the table modestly by trying to do the right things and getting input from a lot of others to do that. But with the scale and size of Unilever, we reach about 2 billion consumers a day. We're in 190 countries, is to try to create tipping points that change markets. And that's obviously what you then do is just simply focus, I've discovered, I call it the rule of 30. I focus on about 30, 40 organizations, people, and you create these tipping points that then pull the rest with it. Climate change is a good example of that, where you have a few countries creating the tipping point that we're now talking about.
So I don't often exist in the corporate sphere. I don't do a lot of corporate interviews, or I'm not an economist, I'm not a business reporter, but I am a human reporter. I go out and deal with the human consequences of what everybody else does to the world. I was absolutely fascinated to read that you know, you're talking about doing the right thing. And it goes all the way back to the founder, the Mr. Lever of Unilever, who I read, you know, used to sleep at the top, on the rooftop of his building. You apparently, when you first took the job, spent one night up there. But it goes all the way back
Until my wife told me to go inside.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that, you know, in a second, and why you did that. But you know, Lifebuoy soap in the 1890s that was, you know, meant to help hygiene in Victorian England. The fact that he cared about people's, you know, his workers' working conditions, their health care, pension plans. Again, you know, it's quite rare.
Yeah, he was an interesting person. Obviously, I never met him. But when I came into the company, coming in from the outside, I really discovered that it was up to me to prove myself in the company. And some people were interpreting the fact that I came from a competitor not as really positive. So it was sort of the Trojan horses coming into the company. And my strategy was obviously, Jim Collins talks about nurturing the core before you stimulate progress. And one of the things I had to do is really understand this company better than anybody else and show respect to what was really working. Our first meeting with our management, I actually had it in a place called Horton Manor, which is by Port Sunlight, where Lord Lever actually used to live. And in studying the guy, he believed in a concept of prosperity shared, he called it. Unlike his contemporaries, if I may say, which were the Carnegies or the Mellons or the Rockefellers and all these others who would duly visit him when they would come into the ports before paying respect to the Queen. He was one of these people that actually never had money. He always gave his money away before he had it. So in that sense, he was a very unusual guy. Also in the business, he was on the verge of bankruptcy basically his whole life. And fortunately, when he passed on in 1925, and then obviously the crisis of 29, the company had to merge, and that's how we became Anglo-Dutch, but he would not have survived that. And at that time, when he grew up from a modest grocery store and was building his business, people forget that the issues of hygiene that you refer to were big issues. Babies born in the UK wouldn't, you know, 1 out of 2 wouldn't make it either past year 1. So he had as a mission making hygiene commonplace. And
you do that now in India.
So actually, interestingly, when I came about 8 years ago, Lifebuoy was a dying and old brand because it had been around 100 years and that's not very popular anymore. So why don't we create something new? And the Dove brand was doing very well and some other things. And we thought, no, there is a bigger potential because that same issue has just moved to Sub-Sahara Africa and India. There are 6 million children who die before the age of 5 of infectious diseases like pneumonia, diarrhea, and the simple act of hand washing can cut that down by about 70%. So we've reached now, we've set ourselves a goal to reach 1 billion people. We've reached about 400 million people.
But explain your hand washing campaign. I mean, it's fundamental and simple, but it's so effective.
Simple. Yeah, we call it the Pledge of 5 actually, and I've participated in many of them. You take Africa, for example, we get all the wives of the heads of state involved, or Mrs. Sirleaf from Liberia, who you know, she's been the president, she's been a champion of this WASH program, water, sanitation, and hygiene. And we get them to go on television, and it's 5 steps to wash your hands. I like to add the face visit now as well. It's a bigger market if you do that, but it also prevents blindness, which is still a big issue there that I care about. So we go into the schools, and we try to do this with the 12 to 14-year-olds. We found out that if you do these habit changes over a 2-week program, they come home and influence their parents, which is more effective. And then we can really show that the infectious diseases go down. In fact, the main issue that happens is in childbirth, the first 6 months is actually where 70% of this death occur because the parents are not hygienic, as you can understand. So,
getting back to climate, and you know, fellow billionaires and others, people like Ted Turner, who I mentioned, said that if he was advising young business people today and they said, oh, how can we, you know, become like you, a billionaire, he would have said clean energy, alternate energy, that's what you should be going into. Bill Gates has put his money where his mouth is. He's put billions of dollars, gathered many other billionaires to do innovation to try to solve this problem. But the British government, for instance, and I think that you're a bit involved in this, has stopped subsidies for certain green technologies.
I've commented on that.
Yes. What does this do to business, for instance, to business growth?
Yeah, so we've made a commitment as a company to be carbon positive, not even neutral, by 2030. And that's probably one of the first companies of this size and scale that does that. There are about 40 countries today in the world where clean energy is actually already cheaper than fossil. And you need to do 2 things. And that's, by the way, one of the reasons why we want the price on carbon. If you don't measure it, you don't treasure it. And that would probably be the biggest thing that could be done. Unfortunately, that's not in the agreement. That's one of the things that would have been perfect, but that would have been
You're talking about a carbon tax?
A carbon
like
price. No, and then the other thing you need to do
not like what Alberta, Canada is doing?
Yeah, they have
like
they have a carbon market.
Okay.
Like California does. California put a price on carbon of $13 a ton. China has now said as of 2017, we create a carbon market fully implemented in 2020. In fact, 15% of the world already has a carbon market. But you need to put a price on these externalities, otherwise people don't value it. What we find is the cost of solar and the cost of wind. If you go to the movie Inconvenient Truths from Al Gore, and Al was obviously the whole week in Paris, so talked to him extensively, and we were involved in some things. And the thing that he was criticized for was these projections of the cost of clean energy when he put his movie out. And the criticism was right, because he was grossly wrong. But in fact, he was way too conservative. Moore's law times 10 has been there. So the cost of solar has come down 80%. The cost of wind is 1,000th of what it now is versus 30 years ago. So it becomes economically viable. All of our factories that we're putting on now is either biomass, wind, or solar. And it actually is a good investment. Our return on our energy investments is 27%. So for any company, that's not a bad return. So we think we can make our total value chain carbon neutral. In fact, my goal is, before I'm done with being CEO, that we have even an ice cream brand like Ben & Jerry's carbon neutral. Well, so if I can show that ice cream can be carbon neutral, I'll take any argument from anybody.
So let me ask you then to answer one of the headlines, that you are finding it difficult to shrink the carbon footprint. In other words, it's a difficult...
Well, what is difficult is you need to have the market around your work. For example, Unilever's model is quite unique because we take responsibility of our total value chain. So if you use our products and we want to decouple our growth from environmental impact, we take also the time that you shower, or we take the farmer and how he makes his product on the land. So we look at a total value chain approach, which goes way beyond CSR or other things. So for example, showering takes a lot of energy in the home, and that's a carbon footprint. If you continue to get your energy from
Is it more energy than having a bath? Because the King of Sweden said he's banning baths in the palace in Sweden, and it's only showers.
Well, we were encouraging people to take showers together. And so the King of Sweden is close to us in thinking. It all depends what you do in the bath. So
that's a whole nother conversation.
That's a whole other conversation, and we won't go that way. But just to be sure that, so this is a typical example where you need the market to work for you, because you cannot do it alone. Yeah. And that is what we're trying to do. Deforestation is another thing. Yeah. That's 25% of global warming is related to deforestation, food waste, or not climate smart agriculture, if you want to. As a company, we can never really guarantee the 100%.
You're involved in that because of palm oil, right?
Palm oil would be one thing, soy, pulp, beef. So we have different reasons to be involved. But 60% of the deforestation in this world, we lose 12 million acres a year, is because of the demand for food. So in our philosophy, if you're in the food business like we are for half of our business, then you have to take co-responsibility to solve that. Governments alone can't do that. Business alone can't do that. So you create these consortiums. And that is where the challenge point is right now, is to how do you put these things together with financing, which business cannot do alone either, with governments, with enforcement, with the industry. And that's hard work. And there are very few CEOs, if you want to, that are willing to go beyond that in their current job description.
So very sadly, we're out of time. However, you're not 60 yet, so
a few months.
It's not the end of life as we know it. No, I'm just kidding. But what do you want your legacy as a person and as a CEO to be?
Well, I'm not so worried about the person itself, because we are fortunate enough to represent this institution. So what my task is really very simply to be sure that it is a little bit stronger when I leave than when I found it. But what my objective would be that we can show that the business can be done differently. We've had a lot of discussions today and a lot of questions about business, which I understand. But if we can show that we can be successful with a business model that is a positive business model in this case, that's probably the best incentive we can give to other businesses. There's a lot of benchmarking, there's a lot of competitiveness in these markets. And by showing that things can be done differently, that you can create an economy, a different type of capitalism, if you want to, a more inclusive, a more equitable capitalism. And if we can just say we made a little difference to that discussion, a little contribution, we showed people that it was possible, and ultimately left this world in a slightly better pace than we found it, I think we can be reasonably satisfied.
Fantastic. Thank you, Paul Pullman.
And thank you, Christian, and thank you again, Paul. Thank you very much indeed. Everyone's been tweeting furiously. I've just been tweeting. Paul Pullman says we should all be showering together. Thank you very much. That was most enlightening and, as ever, hugely interesting perspectives. And we could, of course, always go on so much more when we listen to you, Paul. Thank you. However, it is now time then for the highlight of this year's forum, the Philanthropreneurship Prize. The prize, as I'm sure you know, awarded last year for the very first time, honors philanthropic leaders who are solving global issues with their entrepreneurial spirit. Let's get some background then to the prize itself.
Imagining new forms of collaboration and engagement. Promoting an entrepreneurial spirit for more impact on the ground. Acting for global social transformation by addressing the world's biggest challenges. The Philanthropreneurship Prize recognizes leaders disrupting the status quo. Those who are innovating by blending entrepreneurial thinking and philanthropy. Those who are offering their influence, knowledge and resources to serve the greater good. Let's celebrate one who is acting for change, who is transforming the way we give.
So, to conclude the day and to present our 2015 Philanthropreneurship Prize, please welcome back to the stage His Excellency.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, partners and collaborators, what a thrill it is to stand before you at the conclusion of this most remarkable day. During every session of our forum, the best and the brightest have challenged to rethink philanthropy. We have been inspired to bring a more philanthropreneurial mindset to our efforts. On a personal level, I have been deeply moved by the depth of commitment exhibited today. A commitment to act as global citizens, working together to deliver impact for the greater good. We are do-gooders and do-givers. When I think of philanthropreneurs, one remarkable leader comes to mind. Forward-thinking, passionate, and unwavering. He is leading transformational change in the way we think about corporate and personal responsibility. Paul Pullman, this year's Philanthropreneurship Prize winner, acts on a personal level and as a corporate leader to create a better world. And he builds a bridge between his personal and professional commitment that inspires us all. As the CEO of Unilever, Paul is changing what it means to be a corporate leader. Among the many ways he is driving change, he served on Ban Ki-moon's high-level panel to shape the UN Sustainable Development Goals. As we heard earlier, his company is committed to becoming carbon positive by 2030. And as you heard from Paul, he is an advocate of long-term thinking. He has disrupted the status quo of public companies by rejecting the short-sighted cycles of quarterly reporting. Winner of the Champion of the Earth Award, the UN's highest environmental honor, Paul is aggressively calling on world leaders to set targets on greenhouse emissions. So let's turn now to the personal. In 2005, Paul climbed Mount Kilimanjaro with 8 blind climbers. He was so inspired by them that in 2006, he founded the Blind Trust to advance Braille literacy for the visually impaired. He went on to motivate members of his company to make the climb. What struck me was his note to them. I congratulate you all on a wonderful achievement. You have climbed the mountain of greatness and generosity, which makes you true leaders. I'll never forget asking Paul to participate in our 2012 Global Competitiveness Forum in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. He immediately requested 24-hour gym access. We wondered why. It turned out he was committed to training for a charity marathon. This philanthropreneur is disrupting the status quo. This philanthropreneur has created new forms of collaboration and engagement. This philanthropreneur offers his influence, knowledge, and resources for the greater good, including his own sweat and tears. In addition to these incredible personal and professional accomplishments, Paul is a loving father and husband, joined today by his equally philanthropreneurial wife, Kim. His 3 sons, who I happen to know from a Beyoncé concert in New York, could not be here today. And now, I would like to invite our co-chairs, Doug, Rajesh, Les, Laura, Rashida, and Senator Mitchell, to the stage to celebrate Paul with us. Paul, please rise to accept the 2015 Philanthropreneurship Prize.
Well, thank you very much. It's really, at least today I had a few minutes to look at my emails to find out where the climate change negotiations were, and they still haven't agreed it. I thought the best price we could get today is to get the agreement, but I think we'll have to wait for dinner tonight. But I'll be the first ones to tell you. The interesting thing, first of all, Your Excellency, but I would call you much more and rather call you my friend Amir, because we really have developed a great friendship over the years, and I really appreciate that. And you can see why I'm so happy about this friendship if you see not only today what you've put together, but if I compare that again with last year, if I could run my business so fast and show this progress, we'd be in very good shape. So I need to learn from you how to make these step changes. But the impact that you've had over many is incredible. And the 2020 target that you're setting yourself, I think that's lowballing it the way you're going. I'm sure you'll beat that target. The real winners of today are obviously the 25 or 24 companies that got recognized. I think they are the unsung heroes, and they certainly deserve another round of applause. I was actually, in my spare time, I'm the chairman of the Perkins International, which is the leading school for the blind in Boston, Massachusetts. And this is where Helen Keller went. And Helen obviously was a remarkable woman. And their slogan, and these are people that are blind or blind deaf, which is not something that you'd wish on anybody, but their slogan is, all we see is possibilities. And I think this is what we did today. All you see is possibilities. Bringing the right people together, which for me is the most important thing, be it government, civil society, or business sector, undoubtedly you end up in a better place. We have too long worked in the individual silos, and it was Einstein really who said the definition of insanity is trying to do the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And what we see here is that if we work differently together in partnerships, we really can unlock enormous opportunities and get to the people that we really need to serve, which often is referred to in the panels as the bottom of the pyramid or other things. It's interesting that we're here in Paris because about 150 years ago, Dickens wrote his Tale of Two Cities, which was about Paris and New York, and one of his opening sentences was, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And I think you've seen both of those things in Paris in the last few weeks. The enormous tragedy, horrendous act of evil, if you want to, that has made us even more determined to fight for those people who actually paid the ultimate price, which was their price with their own lives. And I think we owe it to them to be sure that we all fight for this better world. And it was no surprise to me that the act of goodness, the better times, were not only the forum today, but also the fact that we had the COP in Paris with a little bit of serendipity. It's the only time in the world that we've seen 150 heads of state all come together at the same time, in lending support to the people who paid this highest price, but also in lending support of humanity. This is a very, very important year for all of us. It is not often that in the 1 year you have to sign your Sustainable Development Goals, as I mentioned on the panel, to irreversibly eradicate poverty in a more sustainable and equitable way is a target that no business would sign up to if you would tell them that's what you have to achieve in the next 15 years. It's probably the most audacious goal that we've ever set. And my passion is there because I firmly believe that at the moment, an organization like the UN is the only one that really has that possibility to put that global moral framework in place, and that's really what we're talking about here. And then we have, just a few months later here in Paris, the first proof, if we're serious about what we're saying, which is climate mitigation. It's goal number 13, but it's actually written into about 12 of the 17 goals of the SDGs. If we don't tackle that, obviously, there is a serious issue. We will not have human development. Increasingly, we're able to show with the work we're doing, amongst others, the new Climate Economy Commission is Felipe Calderon. The work we're doing, it shows that actually, contrary to many people's beliefs that you cannot mitigate climate and have growth and job opportunities, it's actually the opposite. If you don't mitigate climate, you won't get the growth and job opportunities. And in fact, the best example of that is what is currently going on in China. And it's not surprising that the Chinese have been some of the most vocal and most aggressive people putting climate agreements in place. Then I'm in full admiration of what you are doing, Amar, with your foundation focusing on the youth. In fact, if you look at nearly all of the development goals, be it the first one of poverty, be it hunger, be it education, be it equal rights, it has all of it. We have made sure that women and girls, and children are in the foreground of all we do. If we don't invest in that part of our human development, we're not investing in our future, and you understand that better than anybody else. So that's why I really applaud you. My thing is very simple. You talked about a lot of the social entrepreneurs in our business models that we have, and we've talked about that enough. I don't think we could get the validity in society, nor do I think we can get to the problems that we need to solve if we don't all work together. We created our Social Entrepreneur Award, and we have now about 3,000 social entrepreneurs tied into our work. You heard Chelsea talk about the Questra-Clinton partnership, where we're trying to reach another 100 million people. They bring creativity. They obviously bring some funds where business cannot make it work. They bring the passion. They bring knowledge. I mean, and above all, they bring the reason, permission to operate or permission to function. We heard Strive talk on this panel about the farmer in Africa. It's a tragedy that that's a continent that is moving from 1 billion people to 2 billion people, but has to import food, can't even feed itself. And the average age of a farmer is 57 years old. So we've set a goal to create 5 million more jobs for farmers, for example, but how can I get them to be in sustainable farming, land rights, sustainable agriculture, all the other things, financing, training for especially women that you want to get into agriculture. You cannot achieve that if you don't tie in with other organizations. So that's a simple example of why we all need to work together. And on top of that, these organizations will ensure that some value will stay with the farmer, who frankly gets always the wrong end of the stick. So if we don't create that inclusive growth, we will not have a permission to operate. I'm very simple. You asked why I wanted to be a priest or why I wanted to be a doctor. I'm very fortunate to have been born in the Netherlands. You know, I made it past the age of 5. I got free education. We're in a position that we can do and want what we want. We live in countries we want to live in. Our plates are full every night. And that really puts us in the group of the 2% of the population. The other 98% is not in that position. And I think it's our duty, frankly, there's no other word for it, that we put ourselves to the service of the other 98%. It was the Dalai Lama that said, if you seek enlightenment for yourself simply to enhance yourself and your position, you actually miss purpose. But if you seek enlightenment for yourself, to enable yourself to serve others, then you are with purpose. Be with purpose. Thank you very much.
Congratulations again for Your Excellency. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you to all of you. Thank you for what has been a most engaging, passionate, inspiring day. Thanks to all of you for being here, for your passion, your participation too. Congratulations again to our wonderful award winners. Your Excellency, we couldn't have done it, of course, without this inspiration. And thank you so much once again.